Hello, everyone. This is Bob Lowe, CSIA Executive Director. Thank you for attending the August CSIA webinar. We're really excited about this series of webinars that was designed specifically for CSIA by Nick Setchell of Real-Time CEO. If you were at our recent conference, you certainly know Nick. The series is titled Proactive Leadership in a Rapidly Changing Landscape. Today is the first in the series of 7 webinars that lead up to the 2014 CSIA conference. In addition to Nick, who will present today, future presenters for the series are Ken Edmondson of Short Track CEO, and Ken is also an international Vistage speaker. We'll also have Gina Khalil of TEC Systems and Jeff Miller of Interstates Control Systems. And Gina and Jeff are with CSIA member companies and were selected because of their expertise in specific business areas. And details on this series of webinars are available on Connected Community. In today's webinar, Nick will provide you with information on managing change, responsibilities, accountability, analysis, and improvement. Be sure to ask questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. The host and sponsor of our monthly webinars is Software Toolbox, a CSIA partner member. Software Toolbox helps system integrators lower their risk on projects that involve software by providing them a unique mix of off-the-shelf software products and rapid response technical support that minimizes the need for custom code and lowers field startup time risk. Now let me introduce Nick Setchell. Nick had over-the-top ratings at his morning-long presentation at the 2013 conference. Nick is CEO of Practice Strategies, a business improvement consulting firm that defined and developed real-time CEO and fiscal focus. Nick has analyzed in excess of 1,000 businesses and worked with hundreds of CEOs and executives around the world to help them better understand their business performance and make better business decisions. And the presentation that Nick will do today will be made available in PDF form after the webinar. So, without further delay, here's Nick.
Thank you, Bob. Let me just bring up the first slide. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, CSI and Monica. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first of our 7 webinars in the series titled Proactive Leadership in a Rapidly Changing Landscape. I understand that we have people from all over the world, so while I say good morning, if you happen to be in the afternoon, please bear with me. We have attendance from the United States of America, Australia, and Europe, so this is a very exciting first step in this 7 webinar series. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you who had the opportunity to see my presentation at the CSIA conference, first of all, may I thank you for the very positive feedback that you provided. Interestingly, one of the significant pieces of feedback was that there was a lot of content in that session. And that led to a number of conversations between Bob and myself, and particularly about how members wanted some of these components that were in that half-day presentation in St. Petersburg to be fleshed out in a little bit more detail. And that was part of the discussion about how we structured this webinar series, and particularly leading up to the CSIA conference in San Diego next year. So those of you who saw the presentation at St. Pete's, you're going to see some of the elements again, but they're going to be expanded this time, and I hope that you will find that a valuable process. In designing this webinar, Bob came to me and said, Nick, we've got members who are observing that things are changing rapidly. Those of you who were at the last conference heard Alan Bolio talk about the fact that this next 12 months, this next 2 years, was a time of opportunity. Those of you who attended my session heard me say that the one thing that is going to typify the business landscape over the next 12 months is that the rate of change is going to be faster than we have ever seen before. Now that, of course, will overwhelm some businesses, but it will also present incredible opportunities to those businesses that are able to process change quickly and effectively. The reality is that I want you to imagine that we're sailing through a sea, an iceberg-laden sea, And we're sailing to a promised land where there's enormous wealth and opportunity on the other side. But we've got to get through this sea in order to harness those opportunities. Now, the enormous boats who can't turn quickly, that are not nimble, they'll sail into the icebergs and they're going to struggle. The tiny boats that will find the rate of change overwhelming, they're also going to struggle. But the boats that are going to have the most opportunity in the next 12 months are what we refer to as mid-market companies, those businesses between $1 to $50 million. By the way, for those of you in the United States, interesting to observe that there are 3 million of those businesses across the United States economies. And all of the research suggests that it is those businesses, in other words, the membership of the CSIA, that are going to have opportunity over the next 12 months and 2 years. The real question you all have to ask yourself is, are you up for the challenge? And this webinar series is all about equipping you with some other tools and some techniques from some experts around the world to meet that challenge and turn the next 12 months of opportunity into genuine value creation. So, just very, very quickly, let me just give you a little bit of background from me, because I think it'll help to put today into perspective, and I'd like to do this reasonably promptly. Now, believe it or not, and I don't want anybody to hold me accountable for this, or at least hold this against me, I actually started my career in the accounting profession. Now, by the way, on this first slide, what you're seeing just before I get to my background is the 7 sessions that we are going to be running in this webinar series. And you can see that today is very much about the holistic overview. The next session that we have, that will be in September, we have the Ken Edmondson, an international expert on people mapping and organizational culture. He is going to provide a high-level assessment there, and I'll talk about how these webinars will fit together as we move through today's session. In October, I'll be conducting the webinar on 24-month rolling and how that can really become quite a major contributor to your management culture. The following month, we have Jeff Miller, an individual, an expert well known to many of the members of this organization. And Jeff will be talking quite specifically about project management, one of the key elements of operational efficiency in your businesses. Following that, we're back to Ken, who's going to be talking strategically about people mapping in terms of hiring, leading, coaching, and evaluating. We then have Gina, another well-known presenter to the membership, who's going to be talking more technically and more tactically about management of professionals in your environment. And then I will conclude the series with a session on J-curve management. Now, one of the intents of this series is that it will give you more information on each of these areas, but even with 45-minute to 1-hour webinars, it's quite possible that while this will whet your appetite for these incredibly important issues, that you will also be interested in hearing more about them going forward. And Rob and the team at CSIA are going to be incorporating some of these components into next year's conference. So there will be continuity leading through this program to next year's conference. Allow me to just tell you a very little bit about my background, because I think it'll help to put not only this webinar series in context, but also what you hear from me. So as I mentioned, and please don't hold this against me, I started my career in the accounting profession. I qualified with a major in economics and accounting from the University of Adelaide down here in Australia. And for those of you curious about where I am, I'm sitting in my office in Adelaide. It's 1:45 in the morning, which is absolutely fine. I'm a night owl, so I enjoy that type of stuff. I went to the University of Adelaide. I majored in economics and accounting and was fortunate enough to secure a position with one of the large international accounting firms. Now, this green line that you see developing at the bottom of the screen, looking back, this is what I think I learned about business. Of course, all graduates, when they come out of university, think they know everything I mean, we see this in all the new generations coming through. They come out of college and they think they know everything. I remember when I first had my first day at work, I leapt out of the elevator, brand new suit, degree figuratively tucked under my arm, looking forward to sharing this information with the business world. But the reality was that a lot of what I learned at college, at university, was very theoretical and not necessarily that practical. So anybody who's on this webinar today that does not have a formal college background, do not stress about it. I don't believe that I really learned a great deal about business. Now, when I joined what was one of the big 8 international accounting firms, I had the opportunity to check a lot of other people's work. And yes, I learned a little bit. But interestingly, I really started to learn about real business when I was thrown in the deep end and was headhunted to run a software company. The things that I learned as I was thrown into the deep end of that executive pool have helped to shape my career, and therefore the tools that we have designed and provided to businesses right the way around the world. Tools and techniques that help you to manage your business more effectively regardless of the landscape that you find yourself on. Now, interestingly, and I'm going to talk shortly in terms of communication, different communication in businesses, but one of the first things I learned when I started to manage that software company was that while the people who worked for me were very intelligent, very good at what they did, that they had not been equipped with information about how they fitted into a bigger business plan. So they were, in essence, all doing their job as well as they possibly could, but they were, in essence, acting as silos. Now, think about this concept within your own business, because I see this happening in hundreds and hundreds of businesses. Most businesses around the world that I deal with, to a degree, have this challenge. And this challenge has really served to define the techniques and the tools that we've designed. Because when your experts, when your staff, regardless of how intelligent they are and regardless of how well they do their own job, when they don't understand how they fit into the larger picture, it is possible that they will be making decisions that, while those decisions make their part of the business stronger, they don't necessarily create the maximum amount of value across the business. Now, why would that occur? Why would enthusiastic, positive members of staff be acting like that? Probably because they've never had a common communication platform that enables them to not only understand the area that they have a strength in, but also the other components of the business. And that led us to start observing, if you like, an issue which we refer to as business communication and the challenges associated with different types of business communication in all businesses that we've worked with. And let's talk holistically in the first instance about the 3 quite different languages that we see in business. The first language is spoken by the leader of the business, or if you like, the CEO. And that is then, the second language is then spoken by the CEO, the Chief Operating Officer, and the majority of the operational people in your business. The third is, of course, spoken by the CFO. So let's look at what these languages are. The first one is what we refer to as a strategic language. Good leaders, good CEOs have the ability to be looking out into the future, over the horizon, and define a strategic direction that they want their business to take. The second language, and the most common in all businesses, is the operational language. This is the one that the majority of your staff will be naturally comfortable with, because fundamentally this is what all of their training has led them to do, to be good systems integrators, to be good engineers, to be good technical people at what they do. And then we've got this other individual sitting over here on the right-hand side that, frankly, in many businesses is so far removed from the rest of the business that it creates significant challenges. This individual is, of course, the CFO, and the language that they are speaking is the numerical language. This language is so very different from all other business languages that there can be huge frustration when either the CEO or the COO is talking to this individual. I sometimes jokingly talk about this language that accountants speak as being the language of accountanese. They speak it, but nobody else does. And of course that can create frustrations. And sometimes we see in businesses that these languages are so far removed that there's almost like this barbed wire fence between them. And that will result in one very simple issue. The individuals in your team will act as individuals, as silos, and you will never get the full symbiotic benefit of a team. So very, very early on in our process, what we learned was that we had to create a common vocabulary. We had to bring these languages together. Now, it was never our intent to overload these totally, because we still need each of our key people in the business to demonstrate expertise and to have a speciality skill. What our intent was to bring these circles closer together so that there was at least common vocabulary. So as we look at slide 5, I want you to start thinking about hybrid communication within your business. And the first one that I'd like to talk about is the hybrid language between the CEO and the COO. Now, I'm just going to pause for a second. Monica, I'm just seeing a message here from you. Can you please just confirm in the chat box that you can see my presentation? I have clicked the button that you told me to. You can. Fantastic. I'm going to keep going. I just thought it was worth checking in on that technical issue before we went too much further. So the first hybrid language is the combination between strategic and operational. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most comfortable, the most natural conversation that occurs in business. And most of you are having this conversation without even really noticing it. Why is this the most comfortable? Well, inevitably the leader of the business, the CEO, has grown up or developed their skill set or cut their teeth in the operational environment. Most leaders of systems integration businesses, most of the members that I met are good systems integrators. That's what they are, and that's how they've built their business. So very naturally, they already speak the operational language. And furthermore, the two ICs, the VPs in these businesses, the operational COOs, are striving or endeavoring to climb to the rank of leader. So they are training themselves and they are naturally trying to be more strategic and look into the future. So this hybrid of strategic and operational is very comfortable, and you would have all experienced with a member of your staff that you just click and you feel as though you're on the same page and you're going forward. Now, the next hybrid is the conversation between the CEO and the accountant. This, quite frankly, is a struggle, and we all know it's a struggle, and we all recognize the frustrations that can occur as a result of this struggle. When a CEO or a business owner and their accountant walk away from a conversation, one's been speaking strategic or operational, the other's been speaking accountanese, and they walk away from the conversation feeling frustrated, as though the other just doesn't understand them. Now this, believe me, if you've ever experienced that, is not a unique problem. This occurs all over the world. Nobody else speaks accountanese, and that creates lots of frustration. So for those of you who are at this year's conference at St. Petersburg, you heard me talk about a process called fiscal focus, which is plain English communication of numbers so that the CEO and the COO understand what's going on. Now, interestingly, the third hybrid is in some respects the one that creates the most frustration. This is the hybrid between operational and numerical. It's no more complicated than the hybrid of strategic and numerical, but interestingly, what you get here is a little bit of angst, a little bit of tension, because quite often in business, you'll have this situation where the COO and the CFO are jockeying to be the CEO's to IC, to be their trusted advisor. So sometimes you get a little bit of friction between these two. They're speaking a different language, but they're also trying to outdo each other to become the trusted advisor to the CEO. So that one, in some respects, creates the most challenge. It was very evident to us that what we needed to do was to generate a way of discussing each business issue so that all three of these critical members of the executive team, of the leadership team of any business, could share ideas, could discuss ideas, could bring their expertise to the table, could understand each other, but could develop a team approach. So the real-time CEO processes that include fiscal focus, that include many of the other things that we'll talk about today and, of course, in this webinar series, revolve around the simple premise that each business challenge should be discussed and should be understandable from a strategic perspective, an operational perspective, and a numerical perspective. Once that vocabulary is in place, and once that commitment to share information in that manner is in place, you will get the symbiotic benefit of a team and you will create real value. So having recognized that languages differ within a business environment, let's also look at the fact that leaders and individuals within a business environment also differ. And let's ask the question, what is the perfect skill mix of a real-time CEO, of a leader within this environment? Now, we've talked about the fact that it is critical that this person has strength in strategy and vision. Guys, I know that this can be a challenge, but please believe me that you have to spend some of every single day looking at the horizon, lifting your eyes and defining a journey, plotting a map through these icebergs. And I know that there are going to be 100 reasons why you can't do that. There's no shortage of excuses for avoiding this. The 80 tactical things that you have to do today, the 20 that you still haven't done from yesterday. But please believe me that if you don't do this, you will be a rudderless ship. This is absolutely critical. The most successful businesses that we see across any population, including the CSIA membership, are those that consistently challenge the direction that they're taking and the journey that they're taking by looking at the horizon. Now, once you have that journey defined, and of course that will continue to get challenged as the movement of the icebergs in front of you and around you change, but once you have clarity on your vision, you need to find a formula to lead and motivate the people around you so that they are all heading in the same direction as you are. As I talk to many of the CSIA members at the conference, and as I've had the opportunity and privilege to talk to so many of them since, many of you have developed natural and effective leadership styles. It is incredibly important. Interestingly, this is a skill that the people who do it best don't even recognize they've got, but it's so incredibly important. And in this webinar series, you're going to hear from some experts about how and why that is so important. The next discipline of business is that you will need to be good at what you do. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to make the assumption that every single attendant today, of which we have lots and lots, is good at what they do. Now, whether that's flawed or not, I don't really mind. Of all of the people I met at the conference, you all seem pretty smart at what you do. But I'm also going to tell you one undeniable fact about business. Rarely do businesses underperform or fail because the leader is not good at the original skill. Almost inevitably, they've had extensive training in the original skill. The problem in business comes about because of weaknesses in other skills that they're expected to have that they've not received training in. Now, the final discipline or quadrant, if you like, is understanding of finance. This slide that you see on the screen right now, slide 6, is, if you like, the ideal leader. Now, I've had the privilege of meeting thousands of executives around the world. So have the other presenters that will present to your webinar series. I don't think I have ever met an individual evenly balanced like this. So let me tell you about the individual that we more commonly meet, and an individual that is a very, very common skill mix in the CSIA membership, where the predominant strength is that you're very, very good at systems integration. You're very good at your traditional skill. Most of your training has been received in that environment, and you're good at it. You enjoy doing it, you're good at it. That's why the business has been successful. Those of you who have managed to navigate what has been a very challenging 2, 3, 4 years around global economies, not just in the United States, but of course we see massive economic unrest throughout Europe and in other elements of the world. But those of you who have managed to get through those challenging times, I suggest that you have a natural strategic and visionary skill. I suggest that you've learned over your years of leading your business a leadership and motivational style that has worked for you. Whether it's ideal or not, this webinar will equip you with a series of other tools to perhaps strengthen that area. But the reality is that you've developed that. For most businesses, an understanding of finance is the weak suit, which is why we spent so much of the conference at St. Petersburg on fiscal focus. Now, let's progress to understanding how, what this slide is telling us is that leaders in business have very different skills, and so, of course, do businesses. Now, while we are predominantly dealing with a membership of CSIA members, I've already learned that across that membership, there are quite significant differences between these different businesses, and people like Ken and people like Jeff and people like Gina and myself are very used to businesses that we talk to saying, "Oh, this is all very interesting, but do you realise we're different?" And of course we realise you're different, and those differences might well be any one of these 4 bullet points, whether it be a specific element of your industry you operate in, whether your resource usage is slightly different, your output motivation or your capacity constraints. Of course, all of these differences exist. But as quickly as we identify these differences, let's also appreciate that there are very, very strong similarities between the businesses that are on this webinar and indeed all businesses in the world. The strongest similarity that will link every single participant in today's webinar is that you are all using input and you are all striving to create output. Engineers relate very well to this concept. And the first module of Real-Time CEO, the fiscal focus module that you saw at St. Petersburg, this is a module that fundamentally says, how well do you use input? How well do you create output? And what could you change in this formula, this mathematical formula, to make this business more efficient? And that common theme to all businesses is incredibly important to understand, because you can build a lot of management tools around the concept of input and output. Now, as we looked further into the businesses, to the large population of businesses that we have analysed, we found other very strong similarities. All businesses have foundation principles. All businesses utilise people. All businesses are seeking or are using an operational functionality to do what they do. And all businesses are seeking to access, and in very rare circumstances, to influence the market that they are dealing with. So let's take those business principles and let's put them into a quadrant model. And let's start challenging, or self-auditing if you want, how well you are performing in each of these quadrants. And as I work through this quadrant conversation, what I hope you will see is a description not only of the holistic responsibility of good leaders in rapidly changing landscapes, but also the reason why we have structured this webinar to equip you with tools outside your traditional skill set. So, up in the foundation quadrant, I'd like you to all ask yourself a question that looks remarkably simple to ask. Why do you exist? Now this question looks remarkably simple to answer until we explain that one of the rules is that you are not allowed to answer this numerically. You are not allowed to say that you exist to create profit, to create wealth, to create value. That is not the reason why you exist, and indeed if it is the reason why you exist, your life sucks. The reality here is that if you do what you do well, you will create wealth. You will create money, you'll create value, you'll create wealth. That is the outcome of doing what you do well. But what I want to know here is what is your guiding principles? What is your purpose? What are your core values? Why do you exist? When you took on the challenge to run the business that you run today, why did you do it? You probably moved from another job into this environment. Maybe you had a strong entrepreneurial flair. Maybe you had a passion to make the world better. What was it? Why do you exist? And by the way, one of the ways that you can test this in your own business, and we do this a lot in workshop environments, is that you can get your key executives together and ask them the question, why do we exist? And observe how very different the answers are. Sometimes the answers are so remarkably different that I'm tempted to say to the workshop that I'm running, hey guys, do we all work for the same business here? Now, if you're wondering why I'm pushing this issue early on in this process, it's very simply this. If you do not have genuine strength in this quadrant, every other strategy that you seek to implement will be compromised. It is as simple as that. This is one of the rare areas where you have a genuine advantage over your Fortune 500 cousins. If you go and work for a Fortune 500 business, you don't get to set the culture and the foundation. That has been set by hundreds of people for decades prior to you, and you need to learn to march in line. But when you do what you're doing today, which is embarking upon running your own business, you have the right and indeed the obligation to define this culture and set this foundation. Make sure you do not give up one of the few advantages you have over your Fortune 500 cousins. Let's ask another question, which is typically reasonably easy to answer. Who are your customers? And we will refer to this and we will call this your market. Next question. Who works for your business? This is, of course, what we refer to as your people. And finally, how efficient is the operational engine of your business? We refer to that as your operations. Now, businesses that have genuine strengths in all four of these business disciplines, they are the businesses that are generating business value. They are the businesses that are outperforming their competitors and are succeeding. Fortune 500 companies have armies of people working in each of these areas, but typically mid-market companies, mid-market anything from $1 million to $50 million, typically those businesses only have strengths in one or two of these business disciplines. Let's now help you with this self-audit. And as you will see as we work through this, we're not only going to help you self-audit these questions, but we're actually going to try and equip you with tools to make you stronger. But let's ask the penetrating set of questions for these quadrants. This foundation that you have in your business, that quite frankly was probably very effective when you defined it 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, how well equipped is it going to be to deal with the rigors of the next 2 years? 2 years that will be typified by one thing and one thing alone. The rate of change will be faster than you have ever seen before. If you continue to use the principles that made your business successful 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, they will be less effective over the next 2 years. You have to modify the way you do business, and this webinar is all about equipping you to do that. This webinar series is about equipping you to do that. Next question. Are your sales and marketing strategies complementary? Now, I know that CSIA has been doing a lot of work with its membership on marketing, so we have not incorporated a webinar on marketing in this series because that process is already underway. But I want you to understand how critically important this quadrant is and how it fits in to the holistic responsibility of the leader of your business. And in this question, in some respects, the most important word is the word "and." In too many mid-market companies, these words are wedged together. A CEO will introduce you proudly to his VP of Sales and Marketing. The words get wedged together, sales and marketing. Guys, it's incredibly important that you understand that these are two totally separate functions. One is a tactical function, one is a strategic function. Sales is the tactical function of identifying a prospect, qualifying that prospect, and closing the deal. Tactical. Marketing is the strategic function of raising awareness so that people want to do business with you. The reality here is this. This is one of the biggest differences, single differences between Fortune 500 companies and mid-market companies. When I describe to you that one is a strategic function and one is a tactical function, surely you would appreciate that it makes sense to put the strategic before the tactical. And that, of course, is what businesses in the Fortune 500 arena do. Well before they even contemplate briefing a salesperson, or in fact even recruiting a salesperson, they spend millions, sometimes billions of dollars on the more important strategic issue of marketing and placement. They ask the question not, is this a good product or service, but is the market ready for it? And if it's not, quite frankly, that product or service gets shelved. Once they have created awareness and interest and demand, that's when they then bring the tactical piece into the equation and they brief their salespeople so that they are more effective to a market that is already ready for that product or service. This is the complete opposite of mid-market, where inevitably marketing is a subset or a forgotten cousin of the sales department. You would be amazed how many VP of sales and marketing who I've met that enthusiastically tell me that they've got 5 or 10 or 15 people out there selling and promoting their services. And I say, well, that's exciting. Tell me about your marketing department. Oh, she's not in this morning. She only works Tuesday morning. Oh, she's good. She makes a lot of calls. In most mid-market companies, marketing is a subset of sales. They've got it wrong. They've put the tactical in front of the strategic. Now, I know you guys are doing work on this. I know that CSIA is doing work on this, so we're not going to go into this any further in this webinar series, but I want you to understand how critically important it is. Next question. Do you have a validated way of assessing the people that work for your organization? Now, I'm going to go out on a limb again, and I'm going to bet about 100% of the attendants in today's webinar at some stage in their career have muttered those immortal words, people are our greatest asset. And you know what? You're probably right. People are probably your greatest asset. But if you genuinely believe that, what you then have to believe is that one of the most important bullet points in your job description is that you are all part-time psychologists. Grown-up babysitters, if you like, but let's go with part-time psychologists. Now, I wonder how many of our attendants today have a degree in psychology. I suspect not many. So, in essence, you don't have the technical skills to meet one of your most important bullet points in your job description, which is harnessing and managing people. Now, there's some good news here. And that is that psychologists have been preparing and working and designing a range of tools that enable you to do this role of part-time psychologist. These are tools available to people who don't have a psychology background. They're presented in plain English, and they help you meet this critically important element of your job description. We will come back and talk about that shortly. Next question, down in the operations quadrant. Can your operational engine, the heart of your business, produce in a timely manner a quality product? And can you grow that business as rapidly as the opportunities will ask you to grow it by over the next 2 years. It is fascinating as I travel around the United States and around other parts of the world to see the enthusiasm that abounds as economic conditions recover. We've seen this recovery in the United States now for the better part of 2 years. Not necessarily a massive growth, but just consistent strengthening of the commercial sector of the United States of America. And when I was in Europe a month or so ago, particularly in the UK, I started to see some of that optimism growing in Europe as well, an area that has traditionally or has consistently over the past 2-3 years been presented to us in the media as an economic basket case. Well, yes, it's under pressure, but the good news is there are pockets of Europe that are now starting to come back. And most businesses in those spaces are telling me that they see the next 2 years as growth time, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% growth, which is very exciting. But my question for you is this, and by the way, Alan Bolio shares that view. My question for you is this: how well positioned is your engine to deal with the rigors of that growth? And in answering that question, can I please make an observation of the typical engine that is in most businesses in the United States after 2, 3, 4 of the toughest economic years any of us have ever lived through? Now let's have a quick look at that engine and let's observe how well positioned it is to meet the exciting challenges in the next 2 years. So what was the first thing that swept through business when the global financial crisis bit at its hardest, when the global recession came into play? So most people believe that the first thing that they noticed was pricing pressure or margin pressure. Interestingly, that's not the first thing that changes. The very first indicator or early warning sign of a recession is that you collect your receivables more slowly. Your accounts receivable come in more slowly. And at the toughest 12 months of the global financial crisis, on average across our client base, accounts receivable increased by 22 days. Now, when you hear that some of the larger players in the US market sent edicts to their accounts payable section to hold all checks for a further 10 days, why should we do that? Because we tell you to. You will appreciate how very quickly this changed. Across a 12-month period, in fact, it was across a 9-month period, receivables increased on average by 22 days. Now, what was happening in the banking sectors while this change was occurring? Was the banking sector showering you with more funding? Of course not. At exactly that point of time, the banking sector was getting more conservative about who they lent money to. So your business sitting in the middle is collecting its money from its client base more slowly and is getting less funding support from the banking sector on the other side. What then happened was the rather predictable bloodbath with regard to pricing. Everybody wanted a deal. Everybody was negotiating better pricing. So what we saw was systematically prices falling around the world as people were looking for better deals. What was the fourth change that occurred? The one thing that business leaders felt was in their control, the predictable thing that they jumped towards, they cut costs. In America, initially this was called downsizing. It was then called right-sizing. Call it what you will, it was trimming away lean fat. It was getting rid of expenditure you didn't need to make to save every penny you could save. And quite frankly, that was in some respects a logical thing to do, and most businesses did it. But now let's look at this engine that is collecting its money more slowly, has a tighter relationship with its bank, has gone through price pressures and quite possibly has not yet recovered, and of course has cut away its lean capacity to be effective through the recession. That is the engine that you are now going to ask to grow by 10, 20, 40, 50%. Let me introduce you all to a concept that is happening in the United States of America. It is happening around the world, and it will continue to happen. The key thing in terms of today and this series is that it does not happen to you. This is a concept that I call the second wave of bankruptcy. You've all heard of the first wave of bankruptcy. The first wave of bankruptcy are businesses that didn't make it through the recession. As sad as that may well be, perhaps that's why the recession was there, to weed out weak performers so that the good performers can get on with it. Yes, that was sad, but that's the nature of economics. The second wave of bankruptcy is going to be significantly sadder. Here is businesses that got through the recession. They're sitting there at the end of the recession going, you beauty, we made it, we're still standing. That's all that we needed to be. And now the good time's coming back, the opportunity's coming back. And they are going to grow by 20, 30, 40% off this thin base. And they're going to run out of money. And they're going to fall over. It is happening. It is going to continue to happen. Make sure it doesn't happen to you. Now, let's flip these quadrants over and let's ask the more challenging question. Why do businesses underperform or fail if they have weaknesses in these quadrants? Well, let me tell you, if your foundation is weak, then your business will collapse. Now, the saddest example that any of us have seen of that over the past 10 years has to be Enron. Here is a business that's foundation was rotten to the core. Now, they fooled a lot of people for a long time, including Arthur Andersen. They were smart cookies, but they came down eventually as well. Now, if your market strategies are ineffective, this is a combination of your marketing strategies and your tactical sales approach, then your business will starve. If you have the wrong people in your business sucking oxygen out of you, then you will suffocate. But the forgotten quadrant has to be what happens if your engine is ineffective. If your engine is ineffective or cannot grow at the rate that you're going to ask it to grow, your business will choke. Now, I would like to make a comparison to the human body that is not made often enough to the business environment, and that is that the human body can choke more quickly than it can starve. And so can your business. I'd like to tell you about a business that many of you have probably not heard of. It was a business in Australia called Garibaldi. Garibaldi were manufacturers of small goods, salamis, sausages, absolutely fabulous small goods. They were a market leader and had been highly successful for decades, 30, 40 years. Market loved them. Their procedures were quite old-fashioned, which is probably why their salami was so good. The market loved them and asked them to grow. And they had a small problem with botulism. Now, those of you who like salami know that you prefer to eat it without botulism. This business had been fundamentally successful for 30, 40 years. When they experienced that problem with botulism, they were closed within a month. That business choked. This is critically important because as I travel around the United States and as I travel around the world, I hear that all of the focus is up in the market quadrant, is all about how opportunities are bounding in the next 2 years. And frankly, I'm excited about that. Don't get me wrong. I'm excited about that. But your challenge as a leader of your business is how you ensure that your operations quadrant keeps up with the market demand. The reality is very simple, that you are all now looking for extra resources, extra talent, extra people to come in and fuel this growth. But because you're all looking for them, they're harder to find. It's astonishing how many businesses I meet and the CEO says, Nick, there's great news. We've got 5 bids out there. I reckon we're going to win 3. And I say, well, that is exciting. Tell me, how are you going to resource all this extra demand? Oh, that'll be a nice problem to have, they say. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Well, be careful. The human body can choke more quickly than it can starve. Make sure you've got the right operational engine sitting behind your growth to ensure that you can control that growth. I would prefer to see you grow by 10 or 12% using a strong pricing philosophy than to see you growing at 30 or 40% with a weak pricing philosophy, because the latter is a candidate for second wave of bankruptcy, the former is going to create value. Now, at about this stage, I imagine you're all sitting there thinking, well, this is all a bit depressing. What's Bob? What are the CSIA thinking? They're meant to have brought this expert in to cheer me up, and all he's doing is telling me how tough it is to run my mid-market company. Well, do you know what, guys? You knew that before you came onto this webinar. You knew that there were challenges associated with running your business. All I've done is to put it into a quadrant model to explain to you why. But now what I want you to do is turn this mindset around, because regardless of how challenging this appears to be, it's just as challenging for everyone else out there sailing through this iceberg-infested sea to the promised land. And those businesses that are able to turn this challenge into benefit are the ones that are going to succeed the most. Those businesses who take advantage of their CSIA membership, those businesses who can process change quickly, those businesses who enroll in this webinar series and other educational processes. The more challenging the environment becomes, the more your opportunity that you are going to have. And that is a key fundamental that you all have to believe, that you are going to win over the next 2 years. You're going to create value because you are going to be well placed to convert opportunity into value. So let us now move across and talk about some of the things that you are probably doing well and some of the other things that you could add to your management process to help you deal with the next 12 months. Now, up in the foundation quadrant, let us celebrate something that many businesses don't, but it's important. You're still here. By the way, plenty of businesses aren't, and you should have that healthy celebration culture. Ken Edmondson, when he talks about organizational culture, when he talks about the strategic issue of people, is going to talk about the concept of making sure that you celebrate the good things that happen. And that's just so fundamentally important. Let's assume that you either have a sales function or you have somebody communicating the worth of your products and services. Let's assume that inherently you understand the strengths and weaknesses of your people, and let's assume that you are good at what you do. People really do want to buy your goods and services. You just need to give them a chance to do it. Let's now talk about some of the core management principles that are going to help to underpin the next 12 months. And one of the very early ones is one of the most basic elements of running a business, 3W accountability. We're going to talk about it in a second. Lots of businesses say that they do this, but they don't necessarily do it that well. At the conference last year, you heard me talk about fiscal focus and should we, can we decision validation, making sure that the numbers that are put in front of your people are easy to understand, that they're not in accountanese, they're easy to understand, and you can make effective decisions. Strategic investments, a decision to spend money today on something that will not benefit your business till the future. We call that J-curve management. It is one of the key determinants of entrepreneurial success. That is going to be the topic of the 7th webinar in this series. Risk management, real-time planning, the ability to not just predict the future, but actually influence the future. And that is going to be the 3rd webinar of this series. Coming back into the quadrants, purpose, value, and culture, how critically important those things are to setting the foundation and therefore enabling every other strategy to succeed. That is going to be the 2nd webinar, led by Ken Edmondson, an entrepreneur who's on 4 occasions built a successful business and sold it, and has a very strong appreciation of how culture drives business and how people drive business. Pricing and strategy and competitive positioning, as I mentioned, we're not going to do any more of that in the webinar because I understand you're already working strongly in that in the CSIA membership. Now, down here in the people quadrant, we've got 2 further webinars, Webinar 5 and Webinar 6. Webinar 5 is going to look at this from a holistic strategic perspective, and it is going to join your people to your foundation, and that's going to be led by Ken. Webinar 6, that will be led by Gina, is going to be more tactical in terms of the components of professional development and making sure your compensation plans are right. And then over here in the operations area, proceduralizing what you do, managing what you do, is going to be integral to Jeff Miller's 4th webinar. I often make the comment that making a mistake in business is no sin. In fact, it should be encouraged, because if we can learn from that mistake, we become stronger. Making the same mistake twice, that's just plain foolish. In fact, the Chinese have a definition of insanity, which is to do the same thing the same way and expect a different outcome. So there in a single page is your holistic, high-level perspective of running a business. Now, no executive that I have ever met could go through every single one of those components and tick everything. It simply doesn't exist. I want you to use this slide to go through and tick the things that you're good at. The things that you haven't ticked are not weaknesses, but simply blind spots. You haven't yet had a chance in your career to master them. And hopefully this webinar will help to fill some of those gaps. This webinar series will help to fill some of those gaps. Now, we're running towards the end of the hour, so I don't want to spend too much more time, but I do want to just very quickly touch on the importance of 3W accountability. Let's have a look at a couple of quotes. One from Churchill, "The price of greatness is responsibility." And interestingly, at a different time and a different place in the world, another great leader came up with this quote. I love this. "The reward of command is responsibility, not a bigger tent." Both these leaders identified responsibility as the key to getting things done. And what we see in a business environment, if we bring that from a strategic or military perspective back to a business perspective, is that typically when businesses underperform or fail, it's not normally that the strategy was weak or the idea was weak. It's more commonly that the execution is a problem. 3W action management is one of the most simple things you're ever going to hear. It's also one of the more powerful when implemented effectively. Each time you define an action, attach 3 W's. What, who, when. Now that looks pretty simple, but the implementation of that is critical. Let the team define the what. Let the team define the who. Let the who define the when. And then establish a non-negotiable rule that one of 2 things is going to occur by the when. Either the action is going to be completed, or prior to the when, they are going to request an extension. Once you get that culture in place, that basic culture in place, pretty well anything is possible. Guys, the other component that I want to talk about briefly is the concept of sensitivity analysis. This is a mathematical process that enables us to define what 1% change would have the most profound impact on creating value in your business. We've done this 1,000 or so times and have learned some very, very powerful rules that are relevant to all CSI members and are indeed relevant to all businesses. First of all, inevitably, the most powerful driver of business change is price. Now be careful, it's a double-edged sword. If you're able to inch your prices up, something I know you're all reluctant to do, but if you're able to inch your prices up, that will be the quickest way to create value. If you reduce your prices because of the pressure of discounting, that will be the quickest way to destroy value. Secondly, at the other end of the spectrum, almost inevitably one of the weaker drivers is variable indirect costs. Now, neither of those bullet points, I suspect, would come as a surprise to you, but read them together and ask yourself the question, going into the global financial crisis, how many people ignored the most powerful driver of price, of change being price, and embraced the least powerful and tried to fix the business by cutting costs? When I tell you that that's the complete opposite that sensitivity tells us, I think you'll see a flaw in that logic. And for every 99 businesses that approach the global financial crisis that way, I can show you one that in fact increased pricing and spent more money on indirect costs. And everybody else said that they were mad, but the fact is that they weathered the storm better than everyone else. How did they have the confidence to do that? They had sensitivity analysis that told them the impact of a 1% change on the 8 things that they can change in their business, that told them that for their business, and this differs for every single business, but for their business, price was almost 4 times as powerful as volume. Sensitivity analysis is a basic mathematical technique. Very few businesses use it. They should. The example that you see up on the screen there is a generic example, but it reflects many, many businesses where price is the most powerful driver, and it is significantly more powerful than volume. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the conclusion of our hour today, and I'm conscious of not wanting to overstep that time that we've committed to. So let me conclude some of the messages that have come out of this holistic view of business management, and then I would like to tie those to the remainder of the webinar series leading into the San Diego conference. So for you to be successful, not just in today's environment, but particularly in today's environment, you are going to need to blend two skills. One of those skills is everything that you know today, the experience and expertise that have got you to the seat that you are in today. You'll need all of that. You'll need your A game. But you will also need to combine that with a healthy desire to learn new things. And that's very much what this webinar series is about. If you use that quadrant model to define where you're strong and where your blind spots are, that will help you to assess what you need to work on. And hopefully the tools that you will see in this webinar series will be tools that you can bolt in to make you stronger in those areas. Define and harness your foundation. Ken Edmondson is going to help you with that. Challenge and influence your market. The tools that CSIA have already launched will be helping with that. Understand, challenge your people. The strategic approach that Ken will share with you and the tactical approach that Gina will share with you will be integral to that element. And proceduralize your operations. The guidance that Jeff will give you will be critical to those components. And then specifically, make sure that you hold execution accountable with 3W Action Management. Make sure that the numbers that you are using in your business are understood by the decision makers. Make sure that when you make a strategic investment in the future that you hold that accountable. And make sure that you are continuing to manage your risk by learning from the past to influence the future. 2 more of the webinars in this series. So most executives that we meet start off with a skill set like this. What I hope that we will achieve in this webinar series, and what I hope that we will then lead into the San Diego conference, is to help broaden your skills as a leader to make you more effective. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the conclusion of the first webinar of 7. We will be distributing these slides in a PDF format to all attendants. I hope you found today valuable. I hope that you find this webinar series valuable, and it is going to be a pleasure to present these concepts to you. Monica, I don't know whether we have time for any questions or how you want to handle that, but that's basically the conclusion of my component of the webinar.
If there are any questions by anyone, feel free to type them into the Q&A box. At this point in time, Nick, we don't have any questions for you.
Bob, that must mean it was one of 2 things. Either everybody's left or it was very clear, and I see that we still have lots of attendance, so I'm hoping it's the latter.
Okay,
hey,
Mike Lane.
Hey, Bob and Monica, this is John. One thing I will note is, Monica, we've got about 7 people phoned in. If we don't have a pile in the Q&A and chat window, we may want to unmute all phones in the event some of the folks who phoned in did so because they wanted to verbally ask.
Sure, I'm going to go ahead and do that now.
Okay, I'll answer one quick question that was just asked. Have these webinars been recorded for later replay? And the answer is yes. They're archived in controlsys.org under events. If you have trouble finding them, send me an email. This is Bob.
Someone's asked, how is Nick being paid?
I can answer that one. I'm not. I'm doing this for the love of sharing business concepts with people who want to improve their business.
That is absolutely the truth.
And we thank you for that, Nick.
My pleasure.
Did any of our folks who phoned in have anything? Just want to give you that opportunity.
Well, if not, I think we'll bring it to a conclusion. Okay, we got a well done for you, Nick, in the Q&A. That was a statement, not a question. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up. So, to all the attendees, thank you for your participation, and my hope is that you have several takeaways that will help you manage the changing business landscape. And Nick, thank you very much for contributing your time and expertise, both for today and for the development of the webinar series. I really appreciate all that you've done to help me with that. It's late night for you in Australia. Thanks for staying up. Your presentation was really very insightful, and we wish the best for you and your company. And keep up the good work.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
And thanks again to our host and sponsor, John Weber and Monica Anderson of Software Toolbox. So be sure to complete the survey for today's webinar. It'll arrive in your inbox within the hour and takes only 30 seconds to complete. And your feedback helps us with continuous improvement. So in closing, here's a brief list of several considerations. Yes, all webinars are archived. I mentioned that a few minutes ago. The next webinar is by Ken Edmondson on September 25th. Registration is essentially open now. You'll get information by email. The CSIA September newsletter comes out next week, so watch for that. It's loaded with a lot of information and educational articles. Post your business-related questions on CSIA's Connected Community Open Forum. And remember to take advantage of CSIA's insurance and statistics programs.
Bob, can I just, you mentioned September 25th, which is correct. On the slide there, it's September 28th, which I think is a typo. But if everyone knows that these webinars are on Wednesdays and September 25th is the correct date.
Yes, it is. That's correct. Yep. Wonderful. Okay. With that clarification, I think I will sign off and again say thank you to everyone for attending. This is Bob Lowe, CSIA Executive Director. Goodbye now.
Goodbye.
And I'm going to stop the recording now.